the magic of the internet means we are like, I mean, look at this. Look at how badly our friend is. You can't see Professor Tony Collins. The more you're in shot and the less I'm in, the better.
No.
No, that's better, because no one is here.
You need a fisheye angle.
I mean, when I say no one's here to listen to me, I mean no one's here. There's literally no one here. I mean, I don't want to go for the low-hanging fruit. We've got a Huddersfield Giants fan in the front row, and this must be what it's like playing at the McAlpine Stadium.
There's two of us.
It's called the Galfan Wednesdays, anyways. Welcome. We are in Catterick, the home of Catterick Garrison. I was very excited because Phil's not happy because he hasn't seen a tank, have you? Not one. Not a single.
Wanted to be caught behind one and use it as an excuse.
And we are.
Start blowing your arm.
I mean, if we were on bait, we'd be straight out, wouldn't we? Because we're late.
Well, we're not. We're fashionably.
The framing of this is, I mean, for the people who are listening later on, it doesn't matter what happened, but we are live in Catterick as part of the Rugby League World Cup 2021 Cultural Festival.
Us and culture in the same sentence.
I thought it was just cheese, but no. We're here to talk about Rugby League for the first half of the programme, about the World Cup for the second half, because we're only less than a week away. No, just over a week away. Phil Kaplan is here. Last time, it took him 20 minutes for me to ask him a question, so that was good. Bizarrely, the Speaker of the House of Commons has retweeted the fact that we're on the way. I mean, it's a bit late now, Sir Lindsay. You know, everyone's here. We've got a seat for you if you want to. Also here. Now, I've asked a question, Phil, and the answer's no. Not related to former Wigan and Australia player. Tamsin Renniff is here. Tamsin, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Stevie Ward is also here. Former Leeds Rhinos captain, England international.
Yeah.
How
Well,
are you?
I'm sort of England international. I never actually played. I just got injured. And that.
You don't play for the Knights or
that
England
got
Day
in the
or
way. No, I just sat on the sidelines mainly for them.
Still better than anybody else.
I'm a squaddy, that makes sense.
Squaddy
Around
in
here.
Catterick, yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, tracksuit. I've got a lot of kit.
Well, you're also wearing camouflage under your jacket as well.
I blend in, you know. To whatever environment I must go in, I will wear an England tracksuit even if I'm not playing. And I will wear camo in Catterick. So.
Could be a club media manager like that.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Speak from experience, maybe. Professor Tony Collins is also here. He knows everything.
Not quite. I didn't know the way to Catterick, for example.
The Satovich turned itself off.
Well, it put itself in the middle of a field for some strange reason.
But we have made it, and we are here to talk to the Rugby League. And I'm going to start with Tamsin because you're playing. You've just finished the season with York. Another League Leaders Shield, because obviously you picked up one at Castleford as well. How would you, now, coming off the grand final, everyone's saying, well, we've achieved beyond our expectations this year at York. How's it been for you playing and not playing this year?
Yeah, it's been good at York. It's a lot different to what it was like at Cass. Like the environment's loads different. It's like just a better. I think this year mainly we've all just enjoyed playing again. Like, not that at Cass none of us did enjoy playing, but it's just like been a lot more enjoyable this year, which has been really good. And I think that's like some of our successes come off the back of just like all of us enjoying ourselves.
So Women's Rugby League had a great couple of seasons, then COVID hit and everything was a bit of a mess. Do you feel everything's back, back where we were?
Yeah, hopefully the World Cup will boost that as well, like the women. I think definitely with it being, a lot of the venues being similar, it'll help push the women's game a lot more as well.
You're not just with the League Leaders Shield, but also the Young Player of the Year and the Woman of Steel. Not another bad year for individual. Someone say you should have had the Coach of the Year as well. Some people on the internet said that, not me, but...
I agree.
Isn't it? but it's been
obviously, it wasn't great to end on the grand final loss, but then to have Holly and Tara win the awards just after that probably like boosted the season a bit more, which was a good end.
Are you sick of playing Leeds in the finals? Because I know I'm sick of seeing it.
Always a good game though.
It was a good game to watch at St Helens, but obviously unfortunately for you, not the right result. A man who's played in grand finals and won them is Stevie Ward, and you didn't because we met in the Cardiff away and you didn't remember this, but in 20 years of broadcasting, the one interview that still stands out to me is with you after the grand final in 2017 at Old Trafford, and usually
It's a big call, that, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is, because usually when you interview players after the games, they're either exuberant and jumping up and down and high on adrenaline, or they're, well, I tend to avoid ones I've lost, because what do you ask people who've lost?
Yeah.
Where did it go wrong? Why are you rubbish? Why have you not got a trophy? But you just won the grand final, but we were sat crouched down in the pokey room at Old Trafford, because you probably shouldn't have been playing in that game.
No, I actually did an interview for it the other day, and it's coming up to 5 years, some sort of day. I don't work in calendars and stuff, but it's in and around 5 years right now of the grand final. I was knackered. I was absolutely knackered. The guy, Ross Eptonstall, who did the interview, sent me a picture of me. And I know you're saying you don't want to interview players that are losing, but I look like I'd lost. my eyes are half closed, and I'm looking like just out of it. But I remember that it was a task to get through those interviews after, because I was just so spent after the full week of just getting on that train to play, and you know, sort of kidding people that I wasn't playing, and back in my mind I knew I was going to play, which is the most exciting thing about it. You know, the day before, and then my name getting put on the team sheet, and people still going, what? Who is this Lazarus type figure, you know? And that was the fun thing about it. And then I got to the changing rooms, and I went, oh, this is real now. Yeah, this is real. Oh dear. And got the nerves that you could imagine, but got through the game, and yeah, it was one of the best weeks of my life, just mainly because it was different, you know, it was different, and I had my own little narrative going into it, I think.
Now, speaking of narratives, unfortunately, you weren't able to write your own in terms of when you called time on your career was forced on you.
I'd like to revisit that, but...
It's all right. There'll be Leeds will play New Zealand or Australia
I've still
in
got
2 or
time.
3 years' time, and
Yeah,
Gary will ring you.
I've still got
Come
time.
and do a cameo appearance.
Yeah, I've still got time. I'm 28 now, so, you know, I could have another 5 years, couldn't I, if I choose to throw myself back out there. But, yeah, wouldn't be the right thing to do. But no, it's a shame, innit? It's a shame, really, but... You know, there's things, obviously I would have loved to play for England, and I'd love to be in that back row this year. And I would have liked myself to be in it. But, you know, ups and downs, and everyone has it. It's not just me on a rugby field with, you know, getting to go out there and playing the theatre of dreams. You know, everyone has the ups and downs, and, you know, I think adversity is when you come off script, really. You know, when you're trying to... You know, the script went for me that way in 2017, but then real adversity is when that script is to be the captain, to go and win trophies for Rob Burrow, to go and carry on. But coming off that script is adversity, I feel. So yeah, but here I am, and I'm doing something different. I'm enjoying it.
Good. I mean, I think the only person who hasn't got a podcast on this panel is you, Townsend. Right? You've not got a podcast.
We need to get one. We need to get one.
Everyone's got a podcast. Everyone. I mean, Phil, you've got a podcast. You're on this one. When Tony comes, we can say he's part of it.
Only when you invite me, yeah.
Professor Tony Collins has a podcast and lots of books. There might be some in this library. And it's proof that you should do research rather than look on Wikipedia where it says Stevie Ward played for England. So that's mainly the big...
I don't mind that myth being around, you know what I mean? It makes you sound better, doesn't it? I don't mind that being around.
You'll be ringing up Leeds again going, I did play for England. That clause.
Yeah,
Trigger
I
it.
know, show Gary that. But, you know, I wonder if 10 episodes in the squads, you know, across the years, does that count?
Yeah.
Does it count?
You must have a lot of good swag.
Well,
If nothing else.
Of course, I've got some kit, and I've given it to a lot of people, and I'm sure they've enjoyed it, so it's good, isn't it? It's all good.
Whenever anyone says that, it reminds me of Sam Burgess's shorts here. We don't want to talk about that. No. I mean, the World Cup's coming up, and that's going to be the anniversary of that game between England and France, and him giving away shorts to someone in the crowd. It was different times.
Couldn't do that now, could you?
You'd hope not. But I still reckon people would have to. Are they trying to clone Sam Burgess? I don't know. It's concerning. Professor Tony Collins, we are at yet another crossroad in the history of rugby league. The IMG reports was out last week, the outline, where we're going to go next. What? We've seen this all before, haven't we?
It's deja vu all over again, isn't it? It's every so often rugby league goes through the same crisis. It has the same existential crisis. What are we doing? Where are we going wrong? How do we get bigger? How do we change? What do we need to do? and it looks for simple one-step solutions, I think. Hopefully, this the IMG report seems to be slightly different in that it's not trying to, it's not focusing on how many teams should get relegated, or should we do this with the rules or that with the rules. And I think there's some elements of positivity. And it's interesting that today in the Guardian, Jonathan Lowe, probably one of the best sports writers in Britain, has had his two pennies worth. So I think the fact that someone like that is, I don't necessarily agree with him, but the fact that someone like that's coming up with his opinions on the future again is all to the good, because at least it means we've got some kind of dialogue going on beyond the game. And I think that's what's important. I think for too long we've been very insular, we've been very inward looking, and it's taken its toll. And that was obviously made worse through COVID. But there's a lot of good things going on. The women's game is tremendously successful compared to what it was. If we'd have been here 10 years ago talking about it, there's been very little going on. And the World Cup seems to, if it works out, it could be a real turning point for the game.
I think that's the thing with the IMG report, that it's come at the right time, because there is something you can now build off the back of. The other thing that struck me, having seen the presentation rather than the press release that came out about it, the press release, probably understandably, because they needed to get something out there quickly. They briefed the clubs and then they were going to say the findings to the public, and you don't get a huge window just to get something out there. And that didn't have the detail in that the presentation does, which you will be able to read in the next issue of, I don't know, it's gone too early again. But yeah, I think you need to read the detail, and the thing that struck me listening to Matt Dwyer, who outlined IMG's proposals, was that they're in it for 12 years. So they're not looking for a quick fix. It's not like we're going to change to the 8s and it's going to solve all our problems and tomorrow we will be a major sport. It's like, we think that what people are watching is okay, we think it can be sold better, we think that we have to play to the realism of what we are rather than what we think we are or what we might like to be. So if promotion relegation at where we stand at the moment doesn't work for rugby league, then there's nothing wrong with not having it, providing you're replacing it with something that is credible. And again, you're here as the historian on the panel. There's been a huge tranche of time when the game's been played that we haven't had promotion relegation. When we had one division of up to 35 clubs, it was the fixtures, it was the amount of games that you had. It wasn't that somebody had to go up and somebody had to go down. We have got two halves of the same sport. We've got a full-time half and a part-time half. And their proposals seem to be the best way of bridging that. And as you say, it's not about saying this club needs to be there. It's about, here are some criteria. This is what you need to be if you're going to play at the top table. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. To me, that strikes a level of responsibility. And the two articles that have been written saying ditching and promotion relegation is not a good thing have been written by football writers. But we're not football. And I think that's important, that we realise what we are rather than what we think we might be.
Yeah, and I think that's been... Rugby League has never dealt well with promotion and relegation because we've taken the model from football, and football is obviously much, much bigger, much, much richer, and much stronger all round.
And got more participants.
Yeah, that's right. It's a completely different game. But to compare, for any sport, and this is one of the reasons why rugby unions are having a lot of financial problems, because they, as typical rugby union, their hubris, their arrogance is so much that they thought, well, we're going to compete with soccer in 10 years, so we'll just keep spending and spending. And nobody's going to compete with soccer. It's just too deeply embedded and too rich to be able either to compete with or to use as a model. And I think, as you said, for most of its history, rugby league didn't deal with it because it had one division of, as you said, up to 35 clubs, and we've only really had promotion and relegation last 40 years or so. And I think one of the things that the IMG proposals do, which is very, very important, is that it says that to be a successful club, it's not a zero-sum game. To be a successful club does not mean that another club has to be unsuccessful, which is what promotion and relegation means. And I think the idea that we can have Super League, top division, call it whatever it's going to be called.
That's the other thing. It won't be called Super.
Yeah. So whatever it's going to be called. So you can rise to that level, but it doesn't mean to say someone else has to suffer because you've risen to that level. And I think that's the important thing, because one of the things about rugby league is that it's very proud of its traditions, that everybody gets an equal chance.
Well,
And that goes back to black players in the 30s. And this gives clubs a way to fulfil their dreams. You can start a club, and in theory, maybe not in practice, but in theory, you can go all the way to the top, given long enough and expertise and good players and all the rest of it. And that doesn't stop that happening. What it does say is that just because you've got a really successful club and you've built and you've got great grassroots, you've got great player development, you've got a great team on the pitch, that because you've done that, it doesn't mean to say that another club who may well have done the same thing, maybe not quite as good as you, that other club has to suffer. You can all benefit. And I think that's the kernel of the really important thing about this report.
I also think that the one thing we haven't got while we talk about it is we haven't got those criteria yet. They'll be out at the end of the year, but I'm hoping that it includes, you have to have a women's team, you have to have a wheelchair team, you have to have LDRL, you have to have PDRL, you have to have a strong foundation, you have to have a presence in the community, you have to have a certain number of people in what the Aussies would call the front office. And I think the important thing for the women's game is that it doesn't follow the men's model.
Yeah.
You don't have to. But any club that wants to be taken seriously has to have this overarching responsibility. And that's not criticising Castleford when you were there or saying York are doing it better, but you can see, or you can tell us probably better than I can, that some clubs have embraced it more than others. And if everybody does, that's where the game grows and expands.
Yeah, 100%. The club at York is so much more embracing of the women's team, and we are included in under York. We're not just the women's team that has to be there because at some point they were probably going to need a women's team. They actually look at us as part of I would say a family, and that's the difference probably.
I'm concerned now because since 1996, Sky have had their own records of here are the most number of tries in the Super League. So if we're going to change the name of the Super League, we're going to have to start the records again.
Well, I think
they've just got a new trophy for the women with the F on and everything. It's lovely.
Well, but they can still have the trophy. But one of the things that
Yes, to something different.
the IMG representatives clearly made clear when they were outlining the proposals was we're in phase one. Phase one is looking at the game, if you like, and as a game, there isn't a lot wrong with it. It needs to be tinkered with to make sure it's the best it can be. They want to accentuate internationals. They identified 3 areas of growth, one of which was the women's game. France was another. So although there are stipulations on the number of French teams, and they will be asked to have a minimum quota of domestic players to enhance the international game, so it actually makes sense. And London, they haven't said how London they're going to do it, but they did say it will be different to anything that's been done before. That's all, phase one. Phase two is then appealing to a new market while not losing your existing market. So they're talking about a new product, which you would think at this stage might be a shorter form that appeals to a younger audience. And then out of that, they're then saying, once those foundations are in there, we rebrand the sport. And that rebranding, I think, will be the Super League's 10 a penny now, isn't it? Yeah, every sport has a Super League. How do we make ourselves different? And to me, that there's a logic to that. And if you just want to focus on the promotion relegation bit, you miss all the other stuff.
Yeah. We pontificate on this programme. I
think I just did.
About plenty of issues. And for the last few, because we jumped on the women's bandwagon in 2018. I mean, you were on it before, Phil, but I jumped on it in 2018 because I spotted an opportunity to get myself on the telly, which I did. It was great. The one time I've been on the telly, I mean, it's not really on the telly, it was on BBC Online, but it still counts on the TV. And we come up with many and various theories about what we would do with the women's game. But it doesn't matter what we think. Times you play the game, what do you want IMG to say, this is how the women's game should look going forward? No, big question, simple question for you. Just throw it out there. Right? Go.
Well, you need to be paid, first of all.
Yeah. Women as a whole, people still watch the game and say they're not as good as men, but we don't train Monday to Friday, 9, whatever the men do. We have full-time jobs. We go to training on a night and we play on weekends after we've had a full week at work and training. So I think before, obviously, being paid is the next step, I think. And I don't think you can really look at anything else until you get that, because I can't imagine having anything else until doing rugby was full time, because how am I meant to focus on that when I'm thinking about uni? I've got this to do, I've got that to do. Oh, and there's rugby to do.
So where does the money come from? That's not, that's
Well,
that's
but I think that's the low-hanging fruit that IMG can see, and why they've identified the women's game as one of their growth areas.
because we do appear to have a problem with finding a sponsor for the national team on the back of the shirt or whatever.
I'm not sure they will, and I think on the back of a World Cup, I mean for me, that clearly the men's game will be the one that's mainly on BBC One. It'll be the major focus, but actually I think the biggest successes are going to be in the women's, and particularly the wheelchair game. And I think off the back of that, IMG will be able to pick up sponsorship, and I think as long as that it's realised that doesn't just go to a parent club and become part of their income, but it's ring fenced and goes into the women's game to initially perhaps pay expenses rather than make you full time. I think the other thing, without pontificating more than is necessary, is it's how you look at the league structure and don't follow the men's. So again, I think wheelchair have been pretty innovative. We've said it a few times about London Roosters this year. They took an amalgam of the best players in the south of England to produce a team that got to the semi-finals of the Super League. That's not following any other model. That nobody called it a merger and went, oh, shock horror. They just went, we haven't really got enough players in that region, but we've got some who are really talented. If we put them all together, we could have a competitive side. Well, in the women's game, you've got the Premier League South. Now, it may be that not even one of those teams yet is at your level, but it might be that somebody might say, well, what if we called it a Southern Regional Select? The 17 women that we could get playing in that team would give York a really good competitive game. So I think they'll look at all that, and that brings in sponsorship, because you do get your nationwide appeal then. And it will be the same with wheelchair, because I don't think we're allowed to say yet what wheelchair might be next year, but there is some expansion, and that expansion will bring in further sponsorship, absolutely 100%.
And if you've never had a go in a wheelchair playing rugby league, have a go. Because I have, and I was rubbish at it, but it was great fun. It gives you a great insight into the level of skill and ability which we will see in the World Cup coming up later on this autumn. We'll talk more about the women's game in a moment. We're on this IMG subject. Stevie, you come across as a non-typical rugby league player. I'm going to take the...
What does that mean?
He is from Morley, to be fair.
I'm going to take... Well, Morley compared to Wakefield is posh, it's Leeds. I'm going to take the opinion. I am the owner of the team in this sporting life. I think you're all big dumb apes on the field, and you don't think for yourself. You just run for the ball.
Yeah.
But in the changing rooms, when we've had the Super 8s, we've got this at the moment, the IMG thing. Did you ever discuss the future of the game, or do you just fully concentrate on what you're actually doing on the field? Are you actually bothered about what goes on?
It's a really good question, that.
Occasionally I come up with them.
No, I think occasionally you do think of it, and I think when you get lost in the competition, you just obviously do what's ahead of you. But I think with the Super 8s or with the loop fixtures, you're playing these games, and I mean it's an hard game. Sometimes you're playing twice, sometimes you're playing 3 times a week, especially when you're thinking about loop fixtures, and you just have an energy of the room and the change rooms, and you're like, that's a long exhale for anyone listening. And that's because on one hand you're exhausted, but then on the other hand it's like, what's the significance of this game here? As a player, you're questioning the significance. I remember in 2018, I think we played Wigan for the 4th time, and you're like, this game should be like, you should be at your limit as a player, and you shouldn't be able to hear each other. I think it's when we had a stand at Leeds. We had a stand getting redone. You could hear players, and obviously the stand being taken away, you could hear more stuff going on, but just the energy and the amount that was getting put into that game was just below standard, and you could feel it on the field. And it wasn't because you consciously thought, I don't want to put as much effort in, it's because it was just the level that we're churning out when you play Wigan 4 times, and you know that you're going to be playing in a semi-final or the final, you know, it's like, so there's that element, which I guess is a byproduct of what you're doing, but then also, I think with talking about the middle eights and stuff like that, you just confused a little bit for what the relevance of it is, and the amount of games sort of takes that away. So I'd be interested to know what in terms of game time and game volume. I'm not going to go on about welfare and concussion and all that sort of stuff, but I'd love to know what IMG think about that, because there's something about loop fixtures, isn't there? In terms
They did mention player welfare, which is the first time in a major presentation that somebody has said that is something that we are looking at, and that is why the 2023 season is set. Season tickets are already on sale. It's going to replicate what we've just had. It will have loop fixtures.
Yeah.
But from 2024 onwards, loop fixtures, which includes Magic Weekend, as that is a loop fixture, are gone.
And that new product will come in as a...
Yeah, and they are talking about that partly because they want to have a narrative flow through the season, so the Challenge Cup goes back to May. An international weekend, which will all be against France, men's, women's and wheelchair, all on the same weekend. A new product and a grand final. But they don't want that to not have a scarcity value. So that's why teams will only play each other home and away. I think they're going to build something into the 6th round of the Challenge Cup whereby it could be two-legged, which guarantees every Super League club another home fixture. So you're taking a bit of income away, but you've got to give them a tiny bit back. Whether that will work or not will be dependent on the results in the first leg, to be honest.
Two-legged.
But overall, one of the reasons they want to reduce the number of fixtures is partly because, and it was a phrase that Matt Dwyer used, we want the best players on the field more often than not. And you don't get that with loop fixtures.
It's good to hear, isn't it? It's really good to hear. You talk about the other side, the flip side of looking at relegation, the playoffs, which has been interesting for me to see the flow of that this year, because I've had a distanced sort of relationship with rugby league, being away and sort of taking time out. But Leeds for the first third of the year was terrible, and then they managed to get 5th, which is an echo of what we did in 2011 and 2012, and then get to the grand final and not win it. But I see it differently now. I'm like, when did that happen? Do you know, how did that happen, and how does that... So, that goes into the sort of how interesting it is to go into a playoff series. I think it does... There's question for, are they the best team? Do they deserve it? That's up for debate. But the playoffs do bring that sense of unpredictability to it. Like if you've got Leeds going in at 5th and they're playing, Wigan in the semi-final who should beat them, there's a little part of you that's going, well, I think Leeds could actually do it here because it's a playoff game, it's semi-final. So it's, I guess, when you talk about the realism of what we are, I don't know how much that plays into the history of rugby league or what we're used to. But that's intrigue, I guess, that could be put out there more, as a bit of a feature instead of it being, oh, they deserve it or whatever. It's always been something that I've grown up with and seen as, that real sort of result of attrition or people coming together and literally giving it all in those last few games.
Well, Phil, you lived the grand final as a spectacle, and as we said before, promotion relegation hasn't been a complete thing in the history of rugby league, and neither has been first past the post. In fact, very rarely has first past the post been used to decide who are the best team, who are the champion side, so to speak, I should say. Yeah,
because fixture lists were always uneven. If you have loop fixtures and a Magic Weekend, everybody isn't playing everybody else, so a playoff system is the fairest way of then deciding. And we've likened it before to a Grand Prix, that your regular season rounds determine where you are on the grid. If you're too far behind, you ain't going to win the Grand Prix. You need to be somewhere near the front. But once the signal goes for the playoffs to start, you've got a chance. And this year was really interesting because clearly Leeds did fantastically well to win away in Catalan and back that up to win in Wigan, where they hadn't been beaten at home throughout the entire season. But that week off this year certainly was a benefit because it was such a tough season, and the team that finished top rightly won the title. The side that they played gave it their all, but they just didn't have quite enough. I don't know whether Tamsin thinks that you prefer a first past the post system because York would have won, or actually that test in the grand final sets you up for next year because you now know that it's not just about what you do week in, week out. You have to then still peak on the final game of the season, which I think as a sporting narrative is absolutely fantastic.
I think having the grand final is obviously a great, like the playoffs section is great, but I think especially in rugby league, I don't think, and maybe just because of this year, but I don't think even in the men's game, obviously St Helens backed up their win of the league leaders to then win the grand final, but I don't think the league leaders is actually made as much of a fuss as what it is in, say, football, or like the people who win the league are the team who have been the best most consistently all year, and I think then a team can go and win a grand final off the back of 3 games, and they're then the winners of that season. And I think, not that it's a bad thing, but it's something to think about, especially when...
Does the dropping of the loop fixtures, where it's just home and away and maybe the two-legged, does that make a case for, the first past the post a bit more like it would in the Premiership? Or
I just think there's more drama at the end of the season, and it's a test as well, because I'm telling people that have played the game, it's not really just how you manage each week. You've got to be better than each week when it comes to the final part of the season, and that actually I think is a test of a champion team, because you almost have to finish as near to the top of the league as you can to give you the best chance of winning, and then you've got to win a cup competition against only the best teams in the league. If you manage to do all of that, you are something special. You deserve to be champions, in my opinion. I think that's why rugby union have followed it. I think, we talk about other sports that don't have promotion. It's very easy to say we should compare ourselves to football because they have promotion relegation, but the NRL don't and the NFL don't. 2 of the biggest sports in their respective worlds, and their playoffs are absolutely fantastic. And the team with the best winning record doesn't often or always win the cup, but those playoff games you don't want to miss. Australia, the NRL series this year, most of those finals games were sellouts. Well, isn't that what we want to get to?
And I think that's the thing, because we live in England where football is absolutely completely dominant. We assume that what football does is the natural way that all sports should be, but football's evolved because of its own pressures and its own internal arguments and needs and requirements. Whereas we've until I'm trying to think until 1975, 74, 75. By and large, we were just one division in rugby league, and that meant there was always playoffs. So you had the championship final was the equivalent of the grand final, and that took place at the end of the season. So it was the climax of the season. So you had the traditional season was, you had cup final at the end, and then you'd also a couple of weeks later you'd have the championship final, and that was kind of just the rhythm of the season. Now I think you can argue today that you obviously don't want a cup final next to the grand final because if you'd just be exhausted playing 2 finals in 2 weeks. But I do think that it's one of the things that's enabled the grand final to become so popular so quickly. Because I know, if you go back long before the grand final was introduced, there was a lot of doubt about whether people would turn up for the grand final because, surely the team that finishes top is a champion. But it introduces such a level of drama that has already been there in the game historically. It reintroduced that level of drama that brought, as Phil said, brought the season to the climax where you get the best against the best. And, teams can build for that. And, like all, in most sports, you want to build to a particular climax, whether you're an athlete or a swimmer or whatever. So I think it brings in a lot of elements that rugby league can use to its own benefit in a way that the Football League system with no playoffs doesn't quite have. And I think also, in rugby league, because it's such a physical game, often you get teams can run away with a match due to whatever circumstances, not just because one's at the bottom of the table, one's at the top, but sometimes clubs have an off day. And so the league table doesn't necessarily always indicate which really is the best team, because there may be injuries, there may be other stuff going on or whatever. But the playoff just brings everything to a head. It brings it to that
Well, I
climax,
think
and
that's the other thing about football, though, that for promotion from the divisions other than the Premiership, they've introduced a playoff.
Perfect. Yeah.
And the number of
completely.
times a team that didn't finish third has got promoted, nobody's ever said they don't deserve to get promoted. So why do we beat ourselves up about it? To me, the most important game of the season should be that last 80 minutes under lights at Old Trafford. For the women, you know, standalone event maybe under lights. I think it should be a neutral venue. I don't know what you think about that. Clearly, having two Yorkshire.
Every season, yeah.
But you know, have a neutral venue whereby even if it was Featherstone, which has all the facilities that you would want, but you know that you're going to an occasion, an event, and the season ends when that hooter goes, and at that point you crown a champion. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think people that don't like that forget that. Was it the last year before we had the grand final, 97, Bradford had run away with the league. Yeah. That was when Bullmania was at its height. And they'd won the title 6 rounds or 4 rounds before the season ended. And there was literally no interest in those finals. In fact, I think they dropped a couple of those games because they were still drunk from having won it. But you don't, as a sport, you want the climactic minute of the season to be when the hooter goes in the last game.
And I think that's the point, because sport is, whether you're playing or watching, a lot of it is about emotion. You've got so much invested in winning, whether you're on the pitch or you're supporting a team. And nothing brings all that sort of emotional investment that you've made. Even for neutrals who go along, most people go along to the grand final wanting one team to win, even if they're not supporters of it. And a grand final just brings together all that emotion, all that emotional investment that you've made into this fantastic drama. And you know, it's the grand finals and cup finals, they are the embodiment of the phrase.
I think
sport is living drama.
And the other thing about
unscripted
that,
drama.
which clearly, again, these two should talk about rather than people who've never had the opportunity through skill and dedication to even get anywhere near a pitch, is the fact that we need events. And we talk about we need people to buy tickets irrespective of who's going to be there. The grand final attendance was talked about quite a lot this year, and there were economic factors as to why it was just over 60,000. But clearly, there wasn't a lot of neutral buying when you walked around the stadium. It was mainly fans of Leeds and St Helens. Clearly not the two most liked clubs if you're fans of Wigan or Warrington or Castleford or Wakefield. But what you want to do is say, no matter who's there, I need to be there that last night when it's a celebration of the sport. And I don't really care who plays. And if my team gets there, that's great. But even if they don't, it's going to be such a great night for the sport. I want to be part of it. You can't do that with the first past the post system. You can't build an event because you don't know if your team's going to run away with it.
Just mentioned passion, excitement and all that kind of stuff. Was it a bit disappointing that York didn't lift the League Leaders' Shield having won it against Leeds? I know there's the ridiculous fact that there was another game being played which could have affected things, but it didn't obviously because York won.
I'm sure Saints kicked off after we'd won.
Yeah.
So, which
it
made
didn't
no
matter.
sense.
I think they played the first half, but as soon as you'd won it didn't matter anyway,
Yeah, it was a bit random. And then I mean, it was a bit neither here nor there because we lifted it in front of Leeds and Saints, so with them forming up behind us, so it was a bit of like, if we'd have lifted it the week before, it'd probably been better. Right at Headingley, it'd probably been better at Headingley than it was at, I can't remember where we lifted it now. Where were they?
Headingley.
Headingley, Headingley, they were both at Headingley, weren't they, so yeah.
I mean, the good people at home watching will realise there's a big gap, there's an empty seat, and then there's Phil, because of course I tipped Leeds and Saints to dominate the Women's Super League this year.
Just trying to keep you.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if Kelsey's forgiven me yet, but did you like my tweet saying you weren't?
I did.
Was it motivation? Did you pin it up on the dressing room wall? Richard Shawnight says,
I mean,
York don't deserve.
I think one of us screenshot it, put it in the chat and put, we're going to have to retweet this and a photo of us with the League Leaders Shield when we win.
I mean, it's flattering to have had such an influence on the 2022 Women's Super League season. I feel very proud now, because obviously, as a player, I was dreadful. So at least I've had a little impact. So I'm pleased with that. I mean, if you can send a medal, happily put it up on the.
It's not you. It's not only you that gets screenshot and put in our group chat. We have quite a few fans. We get called York City Tigers. Is the favourite?
Well, yeah, you're Catterick, aren't you? Nearly the same colours, so it doesn't. Because that's the, because there are, I mean, this is the bizarre thing, isn't it? Women's rugby league is still growing. Yet, you've got your own trolls. This is wonderful.
Yeah, I know. It's actually quite
It's like
funny.
you're doing something special.
And a lot of them
Yeah.
don't even understand. They're like, half of them are like saying stuff, and I'm like, I wish you actually understood because you haven't got a clue. You clearly have not watched a lot of women's rugby league because you don't know a thing.
She's talking about me
Be
again.
very careful. I know what you were going to say there, but just be very
No.
careful.
Did you enjoy the women's awards?
Yeah.
Because I snuck into those, and Ralph didn't say anything bad, which we'll come to in a minute. But lavish ceremony at Old Trafford. The pie looked lovely. I had to zoom off and pretend to do some work in the media room, but it looked like it was a decent event.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it was a bit random how it was before. I think a lot of us girls were a bit like, well, why wasn't it done? They wanted it to be a separate event, which it was, but it was before the men's grand final,
yeah.
so it really wasn't a separate event because it was like 30 minutes before the grand final kicked off. So it's like, if you're going to say you want to do a separate event, then make it a separate event. Don't just, like, I think probably all of us are, like, it was great to be invited to the grand final in that way, and I've got such great seats, but on the same, on the other hand, yeah, on the other hand, if it had actually been a separate event, it had been better, but we'd rather have just gone to actually the main night awards and been there for that.
My wife told me off because the first question I asked Tara after lifting the trophy was, looks like it'll be a nightmare to keep clean. She thought I'd asked the sexiest question ever. I didn't mean it that way. But it does look like an absolute nightmare.
Fingerprints all over it.
It was great though because because the awards were randomly somewhere in Old Trafford, fans were coming in at the end and then just taking the trophies off of Tara and Holly and Lois and having the photos taken with them. It was a random thing out in the, I can't even say foyer at Old Trafford. It was just kind of
Yeah.
Near the
It was a good afternoon, but it was very random.
It would have looked better had, who's the Man of Steel this year?
Brodie Croft.
I voted for him in the Rugby League Writers Awards. If the Man of Steel and the Woman of Steel had been featured together, it would look better. Phil, Ralph Rimmer. I think we're going to have a break after this.
Isn't here.
He's not here. We don't know the intent of what he said the other week, but I come from the experience of being in broadcasting randomly now for 20 years. You're always second-guessing what you're about to say next, like asking, is it hard to keep clean, or York are rubbish, Leeds and Saints are going to dominate everything. Paraphrasing myself. But there's a time and a place, probably on WhatsApp groups, but not in public.
Yeah, I mean, clearly for those that have been living in a cave, he made a very injudicious remark at the Championship Awards about have any Fiji players yet been arrested, because they were the first nation to arrive for the World Cup. And I suspect it wasn't meant in any other way than there is a propensity for players occasionally within the sport to misbehave.
You're bad ones, you two.
But when you say it in the context of you've been involved in arranging and organising this World Cup and the first guest nation have arrived, it's almost unconscionable. I sort of can understand that there wasn't a malicious intent behind what he was saying, and he wasn't necessarily even directing his remark to the Fijians. It would have been a remark he may have said had it even been the England team. But you just don't say it. There is a time and a place. You certainly don't say it when you're the chief executive of the Rugby Football League. You certainly don't say it when you're being filmed as part of an awards ceremony. And it does raise a question for the organiser of the World Cup. Will it take the shine off what they're trying to achieve? And clearly we'll talk about what we think will be the impact of the World Cup in the second half. And I think it could be massive. But what you don't want is, as the camera pans round at Newcastle a week on Saturday, and Ralph may be sat there next to the other people who've been involved in arranging and organising what everybody is saying is an inclusive World Cup, that he makes a remark that detracts from that and the camera focuses on him and somebody has to say, Ralph Rimmer sitting there, who made a comment about the Fijians that didn't go down very well. I think it's also interesting that it wasn't reported from inside the room at the time. It could have been because there were a number of journalists there. It was reported by a football journalist, one who has written some very interesting pieces about Wakefield and what they may or may not have done about their stadium and the running of that club, which is interesting. You know, how did he get the story? Why did he feel it was right to publish it? All that kind of thing. But once it's out there and in the public domain, it ain't going to go away. And I can understand from speaking to him a little bit off the record, some of the work that Ralph has done to keep the sport going post-COVID, the relationships that he's built with government, his genuine passion for the sport and him wanting the World Cup to be everything that we hope it could be. But you just can't say that.
No,